Woman rancher, buys cabin for 12 cents. Then finds giant mountain man hanging at the gate. Fog hugged the hills like a secret no one dared disturb. Eleanor Cartwright tightened the scarf at her neck and stepped out of the mule cart. The trail behind her had disappeared in mist, the path ahead quiet as if the earth itself held its breath. She paused in front of the gate. The wood was swollen and soft with rot. Nails hung loose like forgotten memories. Beyond it, a lonely cabin stood under a crooked pine, its chimney leaning, like it was tired of waiting for someone to come home. She had paid 15 cents for the deed. 15 cents and a bottle of liniment. Sheriff hadn't even looked her in the eye when he handed it over. It's cursed land, he'd muttered. She hadn't cared. Eleanor was a woman rancher with no land. Her father's ranch had been swallowed by drought. Her brother had taken what was left. Her husband had taken her youth, and cancer had taken her mother. What she had left now fit into the wooden crate tied behind the cart, one iron skillet, 2 sets of linens, a worn journal, and a pistol with only 1 bullet. The cabin was all she had. As she pushed the gate, the hinges groaned like a warning. The mule didn't follow. She didn't blame it. Stepping onto the porch, she noticed something strange. The front door stood slightly open. No wind, no reason for it to be. Her boots creaked against the boards. She laid a hand on the doorframe. It felt warm, not from sun, but from something else. Then she heard it. A low, wet sound, like someone trying to breathe through mud. She turned. Her breath caught. There, by the fence post, hanging from a broken rail, was a man. A giant. Shirt torn, beard thick with dirt, rope wound around one arm like he had tried to climb out of something. He wasn't dead. Not yet. His eyes flicked open. They were blue, cold, mountain blue. But they were begging. Eleanor didn't remember reaching for the knife in her boot, only that it was in her hand as she stepped closer. The man's body sagged against the post, 1 foot half dragging along the ground. Rope had torn into his wrist. His lip bled, dried and cracked. His breath came shallow, like each one might be his last. He made no move, no sound, only watched her. She had seen eyes like that once. In the mirror, the night her husband slammed the door for the last time. That same frozen fear, masked with rage. That same quiet plea, "Don't finish me off." Eleanor lowered the knife, slowly. "You alive?" she asked, voice hoarse. No answer. Just the way his chest twitched when he tried to breathe. She circled him. The post had broken beneath his weight, the rope half unraveled. Looked like he'd been hanging there a while. Days, maybe. Stupid man, or desperate. She had half a mind to walk away. She didn't have the tools, or the strength. She barely had enough food for herself. And this? This was a mess. "Why here?" she muttered. The man's knees gave. She caught his weight by instinct, grunting under the strain. His head fell against her shoulder, heavy and hot with fever. His body smelled of sap, sweat, and something else. Rot, maybe. His hand, bloodied and raw, clutched the edge of her coat. She froze. He wasn't holding her. He was holding on. The panic flared in her chest. This wasn't her problem. Not again. She had done the nurse's work once, with her mother. Had cleaned blood and bile, spoon-fed bitter broth to a woman who couldn't speak by the end. She had watched breath leave a body. She had buried someone alone before. She wasn't about to do it again. And yet, Eleanor looked at the man's hand, at the scars down his arm. Deep ones, old and new. Some jagged like knives, some neat like stitches. Pain had lived in him for a long time. "Damn it," she whispered. She dropped her knife and gripped him tighter. It took everything to get him off the rail. He collapsed half on her, half in the dirt, her legs buckled. They fell together, a mess of limbs and breath. She cursed again. Not him, herself. "I don't even know your name," she muttered. His lips moved. She leaned in, but he said nothing, only clung. By evening, Eleanor had dragged the man inside. She didn't have a bed for him, just a quilt and a sack of old oats she used to prop his shoulders. She lit the fire with trembling hands, using the last of the dry kindling. The room filled with warmth and shadows. He hadn't spoken. But his fever had broken just after sunset, and with it he started to twitch, mumble, relive things in sleep. Names. Yells. One word came back again and again. Jacob. Eleanor sat near the hearth, boots off, rubbing her sore ankle. She had twisted it earlier, dragging him. Now she watched the stranger's face in the firelight, bruised, bearded, barely human. She'd wrapped his wrist where the rope tore skin, cleaned the dried blood around his temple, but it was the other scars that stayed with her. Not just fresh wounds, but old burns along his ribs, thick scar tissue on his back like lashings. He'd been punished, repeatedly. But for what? Around midnight, he woke, eyes flicked open, panicked. He shot upright, gasping, then grabbed his ribs and collapsed again with a groan. Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't reach for the pistol either, just leaned forward. "You're safe here," she said, quiet. He looked at her, lips cracked. "You're not with them," he croaked. "Who?" His head dropped back. He blinked slow. "They said I took something. Said I lied." He swallowed hard. "Took her away." Eleanor didn't understand, but something about the way he said her made her chest tighten. "Who took who?" He didn't answer, just stared into the fire, haunted. By morning, she stepped outside to fetch water from the creek that ran behind the cabin. The fog had lifted, sun rising red over the ridge. That's when she saw the tracks. Boot prints. 4. Ma. 5 sets. Not hers, not his, and not old. She knelt, ran a finger along one, deep heel, worn sole. Men with weight, maybe armed. She dropped the bucket and ran back inside. The man had passed out again. Eleanor closed the door, bolted it, pulled her pistol from under the floorboard. She hadn't needed it in years, not since the night she'd pulled it on her drunk brother. Hadn't fired it, but it had changed something in him. He never came back after that. She checked the chamber. 1 bullet, 1 man, and 5 sets of boots. She turned to the stranger. "Who's coming for you?" she asked. His voice came slow, thick with sleep. "The Jarretts." That name hit her like a slap. Jarrett. She'd heard it in town. A cattle clan turned land barons, men who ran half the valley. The kind of men who bought judges, carried knives on Sundays, and smiled while ruining lives. "Why them?" she whispered. "I married their daughter," he said, eyes dull. Eleanor blinked. "And?" "She died. I buried her. They say I killed her." The room went silent. Something cracked inside Eleanor. She saw it then. This wasn't just some runaway or wounded man. This was a marked man. Accused. Hunted. The Jarretts didn't chase ghosts. If they were coming, it meant blood. And she had just brought him into her only home. Too late now. The rain came that evening, soft and steady, tapping against the tin roof like an old lullaby. Eleanor sat by the window, stitching the torn sleeve of her only coat. Across the room the man lay still, his eyes open, staring at nothing. She didn't ask if he remembered anything. She didn't speak at all. But she noticed. He hadn't tried to run, hadn't flinched when she brought the mug of broth. He drank it this time, slow and silent. She didn't push him. She just lit a second lamp and sat on the floor across from him, her back against the wall, knees pulled close. The fire popped. Once. The wind stirred the cabin's old boards. The silence settled deep, but not cold. After a while she spoke. Not loud, not rehearsed, just a whisper from her chest. "My husband used to call this place a witch's hut," she said. "Said only cursed women end up in the woods alone." The man didn't laugh, but his eyes shifted. He was listening. "I stayed with him 5 winters. Last one he came home drunk, slammed the stew pot at my feet, called me barren, hit me once." She took a breath. I hit back harder. Still no response, but the firelight flickered across his face, softer now. "I didn't bury him," she added, "but I buried the idea of love after that." A long pause followed. He sat up with a groan, hand pressed to his ribs. "I didn't kill her," he said, voice like gravel. "Clara. That was her name." Eleanor met his eyes. She was sick, always coughing. Jarrett's never let her see a doctor, said it made the family look weak. She begged me to take her away. I did. He looked at his hands. She died in the pass. Fever. I stayed with her till the end, gave her my coat, burned all our food to keep her warm. I didn't leave her, not even when she was gone. Eleanor felt the ache in his words. No man lies with that kind of pain. She leaned forward, reached across, and offered him the cup again. Their fingers brushed. He didn't pull back. Outside, the storm picked up. Trees moaned under the wind, but inside the cabin felt still, almost warm. "Do you have a name?" she asked. "Samuel." She nodded. "Mine's Eleanor." For a while they just sat like that. No more questions, no more stories, just the sound of wood settling, fire breathing, and rain softening the roof. Eleanor looked at him. A man hunted for love. A woman who had buried hers. Both worn raw by the world. Both too tired to run anymore. And yet, for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the air felt thick, like something was coming. Eleanor was chopping wood behind the cabin when the first sound came. Hooves, slow, heavy, purposeful. She didn't run. She walked to the front and stood still as the riders came into view. 5 men on horseback, long coats, mud-stained boots, guns at their hips. One in front wore a silver hatband and a face like cold iron. Jarrett, the eldest brother, the one they called the judge, even though he never wore a robe. He didn't dismount. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. Eleanor said nothing, just met his eyes. "We're tracking a man," he continued. "Big fella, dangerous, stole something from us." She raised an eyebrow. "From what I hear, it was his wife." The smallest rider shifted in his saddle, nervous. But Jarrett didn't blink. "That's one way to say it. Another is, he took what wasn't his, then ran when it broke." Eleanor's hand rested casually near her coat pocket, where the pistol stayed hidden. She didn't move. Her voice stayed flat. "What's he to you?" Jarrett leaned forward. "He's a thief, a liar, and a coward who let a girl die in the cold." She caught the flicker of pride in his tone. No grief, no sorrow, just power. "And what are you to her?" Eleanor asked. Jarrett's smile dropped. "I'm her blood, which means I clean up what's left." His eyes scanned the cabin. "You seen him?" Eleanor didn't answer. Her silence said enough. One of the men started to dismount. Eleanor's voice cut through. "He's inside. Hurt bad." They all stilled. Jarrett narrowed his eyes. "You aiming to protect a killer?" Eleanor didn't flinch. "I'm aiming to protect the truth." Jarrett dismounted slow, walked forward, boots thudding on wet ground. "You got one bullet in that pistol, miss, and 5 of us." She held his stare. "That's all I need." He stopped. The men behind him shifted again, uncertain. Inside, Samuel stood in the doorway, pale, shoulders squared despite the pain. His voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't kill her, Thomas. You did. Every time you shut a door, every time you made her hide her cog, but like it was shame." Jarrett turned, furious. "You buried her with our name, like she wasn't nothing." Samuel's eyes burned. "I buried her because no one else would." Silence. Then Eleanor stepped between them. "You can try to take him," she said to Jarrett, "but you'll have to kill me first. And the law in town might not be worth much, but even they don't ignore a woman shot on her own land." Jarrett looked between them, his hand twitched near his gun. Then a voice called from behind, "Drop it, Thomas." The sheriff. On horseback, rifle across his lap. Behind him, a second deputy. "You come here without warrant, threaten a woman on her land, and I'll have to stop pretending you're just grieving." Jarrett froze. The moment cracked. Then, slow, fuming, he stepped back. "This ain't over." Eleanor didn't smile. "I hope it is." And just like that, the riders turned. Dust rose, tension dropped, but not all the way, because nothing ever goes back to the way it was. The next morning, the sheriff was gone. So were the horses, the dust, the threat. But something heavy still lingered in the air. Not fear anymore. Not quite. Samuel stood at the edge of the property, his arm in a sling, one side of his face bruised where he'd fallen during the standoff. He stared down at the dirt path where Jarrett had ridden away. Eleanor didn't speak. She was on the porch, scrubbing the blood from the old plank where one of the men had fired, wild and early, before the sheriff showed up. The bullet had splintered wood, not bone. Still, it left a mark. By midday, she had packed the crate again. The skillet, the linens, the pistol, now with no bullet, and a few jars of preserves. The rest she left behind. The broken chair, the cracked basin, the cabin itself. She had only just arrived, but it no longer felt like hers. Some things cannot be cleaned. Some things remember too well. Samuel tried to lift the crate, but winced. His ribs wouldn't let him. She helped him, neither speaking. He didn't ask where they were going. She didn't know herself. By dusk they reached the ridge, the land bee. Illau spread wide and soft, gold under the falling sun. Smoke from small towns curled in the distance like a map drawn in silence. They made camp beneath a dying tree. She lit a fire. He sat beside her. Their hands almost touched, but didn't. "Do you regret it?" he asked after a long while. She stared into the flames. "I regret not locking the door the first night," she said softly, "but I don't regret opening it." He nodded. They ate in silence, bread and apples. Nothing heavy. No one slept much that night. At dawn she stood and walked a few paces away, reached into her coat pocket, pulled out Clara's ring. She had found it the day before, wedged in the lining of Samuel's old coat, hidden like a secret too sacred to speak. The band was bent, the stone dull, but the meaning untouched. She didn't return it. She didn't mention it. Instead, she buried it beneath the tree, with no words, just earth and breath. Samuel watched, eyes glistening but dry. "She'd have liked you," he said. Eleanor looked up. "She didn't want to die," he added, "but she wanted to leave them more." "I understand that," Eleanor replied. The fire crackled once, and the wind shifted east. They didn't make promises that morning. They simply gathered their things and walked, away from the cabin, away from the names, into whatever waited next. It had been 3 months. The road that led to Hilford Creek wound quiet through the trees, golden leaves gathering like blessings along its edges. The town was small, barely more than a church, a smithy, and a mercantile with dusty windows. But in the mornings, when the fog lifted, a figure could be seen outside the blacksmith's barn. Tall, steady, sleeves rolled, sweat glistening across his shoulders as he split wood for coin and food. Samuel worked without noise. Never hurried, never bragged. Just built fences, repaired wagons, and at night returned to 2, his small rented room above the bakery. And every Friday, just before the sun dipped low, Eleanor rode into town. Not loudly. She didn't wait for anyone to notice her. But she always stopped at the Schustierd, edge of the barn where he worked. She'd hand him a wrapped loaf or a jar of jam she'd traded eggs for. Sometimes they'd share a drink under the tree near the riverbank. No big talk, no plans, just presence. One Friday, she arrived with something different. Not food, but a letter. She didn't hand it to him. She set it on the edge of the stump he was carving. He looked at her, unsure. She smiled, barely, and turned her horse around. He didn't open it right away. He waited until dusk, when the wind cooled and the birds quieted. Then, alone beneath the same tree where they often sat, he unfolded the paper. There were only a few lines. Cabin's still standing. Roof needs mending, but there's room for a second chair on the porch. No signature. But he knew who it was from. He stared out across the field, jaw clenched tight, then folded the letter with care. He didn't pack a bag. He didn't leave right away. But the next morning, the bakery room stood empty. And a week later, if you followed the path west, just past the pine ridge and down the hollow where fog gathers in early light, you'd see smoke rising from a once-abandoned chimney. Inside, 2 chairs sat on the porch, one still empty. The other held a woman with tired hands, watching the road like it owed her nothing, but brought her peace anyway. Some stories don't end in fireworks. Some just stop hurting.